Hello, welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for October 26, 2016. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. We're joined today by Jim Clausing, who amazingly is here on the couch with us. Great to have you here, Jim. How are you doing?
It's good to be here.
Fantastic.
It's always good to sit on the couch.
Yes. It's a pretty good couch. We've also got Stan Nurilov, frequent contributor. How you doing, Stan?
Doing pretty well. Staying awake, doing the flare-on challenge. That's been.
Is that going along well?
Yeah, I'm almost done, but not quite. I can see the end of the tunnel.
Cool. Well, good luck with that. I hope you do well. And Manny Ortiz. How are you doing, Manny?
I'm doing good.
So I heard some of you guys went to the AT&T Security Conference. How did that go?
It was good. It was very good.
Very good.
It was a good conference, good attendance at the conference. I think it's, I'm not mistaken, probably one of the highest number of people attending the conference this year. So
That's great.
Good
and
material.
Hopefully a few more viewers as a result of that. So if anybody's watching, glad you could join us. Did you guys have any favorite talks while you were there?
Well, Brian, I thought, did a really good talk. It was good to see him yesterday. One of the advantages of being out here, get to see Brian, got to see John, although he's not on the show today. But Brian's talk, I really enjoyed.
That was Brian and Jason Porter, I think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll have to
Brian
catch
and
this
Jason
recording
Porter.
of that.
Yeah, all the recordings should be up eventually, I believe, on the Tech Channel site someplace.
Great. I'm Matt Kaiser, and let's get into our first story here. And Stan, we have no shortage of stories about the Internet of Things, and it sounds you've got a pretty interesting one here for us. What can you tell us?
Yes. So Krebs had an interesting article, as he usually does, about a new type of malware that's being observed on IoT devices. Now, we know in the past few weeks and maybe even months that a lot of these IoT devices have been used for DDoS attacks, and some notable DDoS attacks recently were even attributed to botnets that are made up of IoT devices. In this situation, Brian Krebs was collaborating, I guess, or with a researcher, security researcher, who has some honeypots out there that pretend to be these IoT devices. And he was able to observe a new type of malware being deployed against these devices. So this would be like a proxy type malware.
Okay.
So the specific type of proxy that it allows is a SOX proxy. And it looks like these devices, once compromised, are being sold underground in underground forums for sale for people to basically connect to them and do some, whatever it is that they do through an anonymous proxy service. So now you have, thousands of these devices that are basically acting as proxies for this hidden network, allowing bad guys to do, browse the internet semi-anonymously for them. One interesting thing that this researcher did is he installed some sort of like a man-in-the-middle type software. So he was able to see exactly the kinds of websites that were being frequented by these people who buy these proxy services. And he saw the standard criminal type endeavors, credit card checking of websites and other kind of fraud activity. So a very interesting spin on using IoTs for that. This is not a new type of malware by any means. I think we've seen that before in Windows and even I think Android devices as well. There was a strand of malware maybe 2 years ago called not compatible, Droid not compatible.
And even longer ago.
Yeah,
3
yeah.
or 4 now.
It feels like it was. Sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday. But it's interesting to see how the evolution is being made. So Windows, then mobile, and now IoT. The bad guys are keeping up as usual.
But everything old is new again.
But-
The stuff that we saw hitting the PCs years ago now come back around to the IoT device.
You think it's just a matter of now there's another open, I don't want to say open market, but open source of exploitable boxes. Then the people who are doing that same technique over in one area say, well, hey,
Absolutely.
now I can do it over here.
It worked before. Try it if it, they haven't secured these devices yet, so we'll use all our old tricks on these.
Yeah. And I haven't looked into this specific malware to see how it works, but I know when I looked at Droid Not Compatible, it was actually a strand of malware that evolved from a Windows version
Exactly.
called LuckySec or something like that.
Something like that.
So it was an evolution. And here, I don't know if it's the same or similar, but obviously, like we said, the market is there for these anonymous proxy services.
So did they say how this business model works? The guys, I imagine they compromise the box and they set up a set of credentials specific to that box, and then they sell off that set of credentials on the underground. I imagine there's some sort of way of making people pay for these compromised boxes.
Right, yeah, I'm not sure exactly how it works. I'm sure there is some sort of a way to authenticate the bad guys into the proxy and maintain some sort of a database of who the customers are. I'm sure that exists there. Even just thinking about like the Mirai source code release that you guys looked at, even looking at the components of that source code, you could see there was like a database component and an API component that allowed other, bad guys to use the assets. So I'm thinking it's something similar here, but I'm not sure exactly.
And, it just reminds me of the Terracotta VPN. You guys remember that paper?
Yes.
Where they actually set up their own Active Directory server somewhere on the internet so that they could use that for authenticating all of the endpoints that they'd compromised, which was kind of interesting. All right. Well, that's really interesting, Stan. Thank you for that. And actually, we're going to segue right into one that Jim brought to us, which is actually pretty similar.
It is very similar. This one is SSHowDowN Proxy. It's SSH. It's actually an old vulnerability. It actually was a CVE 2004-1653. Basically, it's taking advantage of a feature of SSH. If you use the -L or the -D, you can set up port forwarding. And essentially what it does is it sets up a SOX proxy. And as long as you know the local port, you can redirect through an SSH tunnel to wherever you want. Well, this SSHowDowN is taking that old vulnerability and using it against IoT devices.
So, is it a brand new vulnerability, or is it just,
Nope.
again, new population for an old vulnerability?
It's new population for an old vulnerability. And according to some SSHowDowN estimates, maybe 2 million or more IoT devices are vulnerable to this. But it's it's based on default credentials again on these IoT devices, the ones that instead of just using Telnet, the ones that use SSH still often have default credentials. So, if you've got the default user ID and password, you can set up this port forwarding, this SSH, or the SOX proxy through the SSH tunnel so that you can hide your traffic as if it's coming from this IoT device. So, then they can go out and sell this to people who want to hide where they're coming from. But, and there are all kinds of candidates, folks who might want to buy something like that.
Sure.
To hide their, some less nefarious than others, but but it's again, this could all be stopped if these IoT devices weren't exposing SSH and Telnet, or at least not exposing them on the internet-facing interface if they've got multiple interfaces. If you didn't have default passwords or even default user IDs, if you could change those, these aren't that hard. These problems aren't that hard to solve, but it's all the same problems that we've been talking about on the Internet of Insecure Things for the 2 or 3 years that we've been talking about it on the show.
Yeah.
And but it was interesting. This one is SSH, and this story came out in the Security Affairs blog maybe 2 weeks ago. So I was wondering if anybody, having read that, was starting to scan for this more or not. So, you know, we took a look at the traffic that we're able to see, and there really wasn't any unusual uptick in the traffic. We have the normal ups and downs in the traffic, and I actually, this chart is 30 days, but I had looked at 180 days, and you know, it was the same. There was some periodicity to it, but it was the same kind of even level of traffic. Having said that, on my home system, you know, I monitor everything on my home network. So on this past Saturday, the traffic on my home system, SSH was 70% of the scan traffic that I saw, which was huge. I mean, that's what we've been seeing in Telnet for forever. But Telnet was a distant second on my home system, and I don't know why somebody was scanning my particular network or whatever. It didn't show up in what we were seeing on the internet in general, but I thought that was interesting. After months of 23, and then for the last month or two, 23 was number 2,
We'll get to that.
and SSH was number 3. Just that one day, SSH jumped up to the top by 2 orders of magnitude.
Now, were you taking a look at the payload or whatever they were attempting to do afterwards?
No,
Okay.
because it was all blocked.
Okay.
It was just they didn't get in on that, so that was just kind of unusual. But I was prompted to look at this because I was wondering if anybody was looking at that, and maybe that does play into, over the last few weeks, SSH had dropped further down and when we get to the top 10 charts, it had dropped a little further down. Now it's back up to number 2 behind Telnet. So maybe some of this plays into it. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just looking.
I mean,
for
that's
things that
the thing
aren't
about
there.
internet scanning too, is like, you'll see, we can do our averages and our volumes and say this is number 1, this is number 2, but then there's still going to be that variation over small periods of time where someone's really banging hard on one port. Even if it's not the top one, it still may come by and light up everything like a Christmas tree. So,
Right, and and it's also a question of perspective. We don't see the traffic for the entire internet.
Right.
So maybe they're hitting spaces that we can't see. Like I said, I thought it was unusual that my home network, I got hit that hard, but we didn't see anything at all in our charts. So it's just since we can't see the whole internet, the different perspectives at different times.
So one final question for you is,
42.
oh, good. The man already knows the answer. Second question. With a name like SSHowDowN, do you think it really merits a name for this bug? If it is that old of a bug in tech, it seems
No.
like, okay. That's my opinion
Probably
as well.
not, but
We'll go on a little bit more about named bugs in a bit.
We'll get to that in a little bit.
Oh, that's a good one. So the next one is Manny, and Manny, this is an interesting one. I'd actually heard a little bit about this sort of bug this week as well, but I'd like you to introduce it.
Yeah, so this story titled "Data Leaked by Pagers Useful for Critical Infrastructure Attacks" talks about a research study that Trend Micro had done, specifically looking at what they could see in terms of pager communication, and they took their study and focused on a couple of different areas. So they focused in the hospital realm. There's a word for that in the medical. There you go. That's the one. And then they also looked at the critical infrastructure. Over a 4-month period, they were able to collect 55 million pages that were sent within the U.S. and Canada, and a third of the 55 million actually contained alphanumeric data within them, right? So other than just a phone number, which is traditionally what the pager was used for,
Okay.
or at least back in the beginning days of pagers, right?
back at the beginning of time.
Exactly, yeah. There's a couple of us here, I think, on the
Who
couch
remember
who
those,
remember
yeah.
them and remember them hooked to our belts. And I do remember the days when we finally switched over to the alphanumeric ones, that was like almost like the first iPhone days, right? It was like, oh my God, my pager can actually tell me something other than a number. But anyway, the interesting thing about this, obviously, like I said before, was first, I didn't even realize that pagers were still being used this way. Okay, so I thought pager technology basically had died off. So it was surprising already that it was still being used. They were still being used, and being used in this way. You'd think that at this point, the security of it would have caught up, but obviously not. So specifically, what they were looking for was in this critical infrastructure. This is really where they concentrated. These ICSs actually rely on the pagers to transmit like critical information about systems, right? So it's transmitting things like there's a failure, or somebody needs to alerts for different parts of the actual system. So they're using these pagers to actually transmit this data, which we all know is critical information. It's
Is it both control and data? Is it both? I mean, is it commands from a controller to say, flip a switch on this ICS device, or is it more like status messages coming back?
From what I understand, it was more like status. It was status messages, so telling you things about things that were going wrong. So there
Alerts.
weren't right. So there were basic alerts, but within the alerts, because we're talking about alphanumeric, within the alerts there was quite a bit of information that was being leaked, right? And so it goes further into talking about that these messages are, for the most part, sent unencrypted, right? Which means that when they're sent unencrypted, you can buy basically a $20 device, use your software-defined radio,
Yep.
and with that, you're basically capturing this traffic, and they say it can be done up to tens of kilometers away from the actual source, which
I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're probably using a different antenna than the one
then
that comes with
then
that
the
$20
$20
dongle.
device, right?
To get that distance, yeah.
You're right, they probably are, but obviously, like anything else, if you supersize it, you end up getting, I'm sure, what they were seeing here, which is, I could be here and be listening to things that are happening way, way far away from me.
Sure.
So they looked at all this stuff. So now they're able to pull all this data in, and so they had, again. So they list off a whole bunch of stuff that they were seeing. So they were seeing alarm and event notifications, diagnostic information, status updates, as well as names, email addresses, phone numbers, project codes, and IP addresses. So obviously, when you send an alert message, a lot of times they would send the IP, like, hey, system A at IP address whatever is having a problem. That stuff goes over, basically over the air, and it's picked up. So, they started to get into a little bit about, and there's a full paper, if anybody's interested in reading on this, there's a full paper they did with a lot of the extra detail. It goes into quite a bit of detail into what they actually did, what they actually captured. But what they looked at was, they looked at messages. Now this is where it gets a little scary. Looked at messages that were coming from nuclear plants, power substations, chemical companies, and defense contractors.
Yeah.
That were all using pagers with unencrypted communication.
Wow.
So it goes into talking about what you could do with it. Like, what do you do as an attacker if you're able to pull this in, which is obviously very easy to do? What can you do with it? Like, so you get this pager that gives you a certain amount of text within it. Well, they're talking about, like, if in order to you're getting information that would easily allow you to do like social engineering. So if you know that this nuclear plant just got a message about some failure, it's easy for you at that point to send an email in, right? A spam email with some attachment that has information that you now picked up as part of the pager. You can use a real machine name, a real IP address of that machine.
The time that the fault happened.
The time of the fault happened, exactly. So all those pieces of information we all know. Any bit of information that gets you closer and closer to the truth in that email makes it a lot more believable for somebody to click.
Absolutely.
Makes it much more likely though.
You could use it also for, like physical, being able to show up at the same
Show
time.
up at the. We had this fault. I'm here to help fix it.
Exactly.
I'm just going to plug this into your network.
Just let me in. Oh yeah, how could this guy possibly know that we had a failure in this exact system?
Unless he was really the
and
guy
I'm wearing
who's supposed to fix it.
I'm wearing the right colored overalls to get in.
Sounds like a movie.
Right.
So yeah, that's really interesting
So,
stuff,
yeah.
Manny. It's kind of weird and coincidental, but there was a SANS webinar that came out this past week, Intro to SDR projects, and it talked about these very cheap $20 devices you can hook up to your laptop, and a couple of the different applications. And pager networks were actually on the list of things that were mentioned. Now, the instructor, Larry Pesci, made it very clear there are certain things that you can do that are legal, and there are certain things within your jurisdictions that are absolutely not legal.
Right.
And pagers are one of those things you should probably not be mucking about with. But for those who are interested in SDR, there's a couple projects that are really kind of cool, like tracking ADSB signals off of airplanes. It's probably the easiest one to set up. You fire up some software, plug in your dongle, and it shows you the locations reported by all the commercial aircraft in the area. And their heading and a little map, so you can see planes. And it's kind of neat and gratifying to be looking at your software and watching a little digital plane tick, tick, tick overhead your location, and then watch the same plane going overhead. It's kind of cool. So,
Cool and scary.
Cool and scary. Well, that's the thing. The space of SDR is definitely growing. And there's going to be a lot of old legacy systems, like the stuff we're talking about, that no one ever thought you'd ever get a receiver or a transmitter for because they were so specialized or because they were so expensive.
Right.
And now that SDR is getting cheaper and cheaper, I think there's going to be a lot more of these sorts of flaws that are going to get exposed on old systems.
Yeah,
So.
and it was always the case, back when I used to have my scanner, the stuff, the radio waves that are passing through my house unencrypted, yes, the cellular industry made it illegal to listen to those frequencies, but as long as it was passing through my house unencrypted, it was always possible to do it. And that's still the case. If pagers are still being used out there and they're still being used unencrypted, today we now have the capability to encrypt any sensitive communications. We really should be looking into taking advantage of that kind of technology.
Yeah,
I agree.
especially if you're sitting in one of these sectors.
All right. Thanks, Manny.
Yep.
Jim, back over to you. And we were going to talk about bugs with names, and we've got one.
Dirty cow.
Dirty cow.
This one was big news last week. The latest of these named bugs that have their own website and their own Twitter handle and their own GitHub page.
And their own swag.
And their own swag, yeah. Well, but I'm not going to spend $1,500 for a T-shirt or $1,000 for a coffee mug. So, Dirty Cow, CVE 2016-5195, is a bug in the Linux kernel that has actually been there since 2007. It was introduced in kernel 2.6.22. So every version from 2.6.22 up to, I don't know, what is current, 4.6 or something, has this bug in it. It's a bug in the copy on write feature. Basically, it's in the handling of shared memory. And it actually was fixed once. I was reading up on the history of this. It was fixed in 2007 or early 2008, and then the fix was removed because the original fix broke Linux on the S390.
The S390?
The IBM mainframes, Linux on IBM mainframes.
Right.
The fix broke it. Sometime in the last 9 years, they fixed the issue on the mainframes.
Okay.
But the fix never made it back into the kernel until the 18th of October of this year. But basically what you can do with this is taking advantage of this flaw in the copy on write mechanisms in the kernel. You can actually write to memory mapped pages that are supposed to be read-only, and then based on that you can actually write to on-disk binaries and bypass all the permissions. So you can, give yourself root privileges, and once you've got the root privileges, you can do whatever you want to the system to consolidate that so that you can get back in even if they fix the vulnerability. But it's a privilege escalation. In order to take advantage of it, you have to be authenticated on the system somehow first. So, privilege escalation vulnerabilities, to me, they're like a second tier. They're not it's the remote code exploit that doesn't take authentication. Those are the ones that are my big worry. I normally don't worry that much about privilege escalation. I mean,
I only worry about it when I see it on my network. Right?
yeah,
Then
but
it's actually
so that was one of the things is, who cares? It's a privilege escalation. Why does that merit a name and a professional logo and its own web page and its own Twitter handle and its own swag? On the other hand, it's in every Linux kernel since 2.6.22 until the 18th of October of 2016. That includes every Android device that's ever been made. That includes a lot of embedded IoT devices. So if you can get this exploit into an app that you can get onto people's phones, you can then root the phones and have control, complete control of their phones or their tablets or, their in-car entertainment systems or, whatever is based on Android. So, on that note, it is kind of important, but I don't know that it merits a name. I get real tired of these exploits getting names that don't really deserve them. And in fact, even the guys who created the page, dirtycow.ninja, is the page for the Dirty Cow vulnerability. Even they said they don't think the exploits deserve names, but people had done it before, so they did it too.
Well, it does make it easier to talk about the vulnerability than,
Trying to remember.
CV 2016. So
Yeah, I mean, we're still talking about shell shock, and that's
That's a good
been
point.
Right.
a year or two ago. I don't even remember when that was now.
I thought I read somewhere that they may have found this floating around in the wild. Did you see anything on that?
Well, there was a proof of concept that was released when they created the page. There is now some rumblings that there actually was an exploit embedded in some sort of an HTTP thing, whether it was dropped via drive-by or whatever. So there are rumblings that it's been seen in the wild. I haven't actually seen the exploit. I haven't seen a PCAP showing that it was used in the wild, but there are some rumblings that since they released all of this, it may actually be out there in the wild now.
Fantastic news. So is there a patch at least?
Yeah. All of the current versions of the Linux kernel released after the 18th of October. So all of your Linux distros, your Ubuntu, your Red Hat, your CentOS, your Fedora, if you're doing updating the packages regularly, apply those updates. My Ubuntu has actually done 2 kernel updates in the last week, and one of those was this. So.
Okay. But of course, we do know that Android and IoT are going to lag behind,
exactly,
as they always do.
Yeah, and another one of Brian's favorite things to harp on, the lack of an automatic update infrastructure for these IoT devices. They may never get patched.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Thanks for bringing that to us.
You're welcome.
So let's go to the internet weather. We have the top 10 most probed ports. And it looks like there's no real surprises here. Well, maybe one. 23 TCP, which we know is Telnet, and 22 TCP, which we know is SSH, are the reigning kings and have been pretty much for the last half of a year to a year, I think. 2323 is an alternate port for Telnet, and we know that's strongly correlated with Mirai botnet activity. 443 is HTTPS, and 80 is HTTP. Again, very common ports to be scanned. 3389 is... Thank you. Remote desktop. 123 is NTP. That's 123 UDP. Yep. 445 is perhaps some configure still going on. And
or
then
other Windows file
or
sharing.
other Windows file sharing activities. Yeah. And then 1433 is MS SQL.
Yes.
All right. Taking a closer look at port 23 TCP, you can see in the last week and a half, we have a significant uptick. This is a 30-day graph showing the number of scan flows on port 23. I don't have any theories as to why this happened, except perhaps that this growing interest in the Mirai botnet might be leading people to explore this space more, either to find compromised devices or to try and build their own botnets. But I think there's been a lot of attention paid to IoT in the last month, and rightfully so. So you can see why there's activity there. Scan sources on port 2323, which, like we said before, was Mirai. You can see a significant spike, I would say about a week ago. And then what I don't want to call it the noise floor, but the baseline has definitely gone up a factor of several thousand scan sources in the last week or so as well. So
yeah, and if that graph had been longer than 30 days prior to the middle of September, that noise floor is just just the bottom blue line there. It's like 100, and that at the beginning of this graph, it's about 4,000, but it was like 100 2 months ago. So having this peak out at 28,000 last week is a pretty significant jump.
And then the most sources probing for the same week. 23 is, no surprise, at the top of the list. 2323 has gone up 4 places. So there are a lot of people out there looking for 2323. Maybe we can use that as an indicator of the Mirai botnet's growth, or conversely, interest in the Mirai botnet itself.
Well, and with the source code out there, folks can be building their own variants on it now too.
That's very true. We know of at least one interesting variant. There was like a P2B one that I was reading about maybe last week. Yeah, but I'm sure there are going to be more modifications, just the same way we see with any major malware source code release. 445, holding mostly steady. A couple of ICMP type codes in there. Most of these have to do with failures to resolve, although there is some ping in there. 80, no surprises. We still have a significant amount of scanning on that. 22 TCP is SSH. I'm actually surprised it's that far down on the list, but I guess it's just relative to the amount of traffic we're seeing for these other IT botnets. And then 21 TCP is FTP, which is kind of interesting, notable. There's only one major active command that I'm aware of that's using FTP, and that would be that photo.scr. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
There is a virus or something that's maybe spreading through FTP?
It's a cryptocurrency miner.
Cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I think we're familiar with that one. All right. And that's the show for today. Thank you for joining us, especially to the new viewers that may have joined us from the AT&T Cybersecurity Conference. Welcome. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at attthreattrack@list.att.com. You can find AT&T ThreatTraq on the AT&T Tech channel, on YouTube, and also on iTunes. You can find us on Twitter. Our handle is @ATT Business. So thank you, Jim, especially for making the trip all the way out here just to be on the couch with us.
It is always nice to be on the couch with you and not just be a disembodied voice.
I bet that feels pretty good to not be a disembodied voice. Stan, thank you for joining us as well.
Thank you for
And
having
Manny, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
I'm Matt Kaiser. We'll be back next week with another show. Until then, keep your network safe.